Carl.
Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you today?
Things are good. Yeah, it's a beautiful day in New Zealand.
You've got entrepreneurship all like oozing out of your head, almost literally.
We should explain just so people know that's an oil on canvas. It's not a chalkboard. Like I would change it if it wasn't. It's an oil on canvas in the co-working space that I used asked for it. So it's just there. Like
Okay.
I can't change.
Well, it's very appropriate imagery for like literally being co-working space for entrepreneurs.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. I think we have to go down the road that we have been down a few times before. You tweeted again.
Oh, they got to take that thing away, the toot machine.
And kicked a hornet's nest. There's a whole bunch of buzzing.
Yeah.
That I thought we'd talk about today.
Fees and conflict. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah, about fees and conflicts. About this comment you made. When you charge money for advice, conflicts of interest always exist. Charging money for advice is a conflict.
Yeah, I was trying to make a nuanced point, and I don't think humans do particularly well with nuance in Twitter, I guess.
It is hard in 280 characters.
Yeah, it's not new information, but that's my whole life, right? Like trying to reduce things down, and when you try to reduce things down, you know, you're talking about the simplicity on the other side of complexity, and you can't capture all the nuance. But I was trying to make this nuanced point that like there is no fee model that is conflict free, and that has to be carefully managed. I don't know what and there's a lot of stuff to talk about around it. It'd be interesting maybe we could talk a little bit about some specific fee models and where conflicts arise. That was sort of the goal. What I wasn't intending to do by any stretch, especially because I used an hourly fee example. I said, oh, you think hourly is conflict free? Have you ever wondered why your attorney takes so long, right? I was certainly not trying to pick on hourly. I think hourly gets really, like, there are certain fee models that get really close, right, in terms of alignment, and hourly's got to be among the top 1, 2, or 3 on the list, right? So I wasn't meaning to pick on that. I was just meaning to point out, like, hey, there's a conflict when you charge money. And I also meaning to even suggest that we don't deserve to be paid, like that we should all be charity workers. But what I was trying to point out is like we should be aware that there's a conflict and start talking as an industry. There's lots of people, like we've been talking about this for decades. We should continue talking about how we manage that and what it means to the relationship with the client.
So I think it's a fair point. I mean, there is at a most fundamental level, just any business relationship at some point has a conflict. Just I want you to hire me and pay me and like give me money to do a thing for you, and hopefully I'm gonna be awesome at the thing and do the thing that gives you good results that will make it very valuable, and you want to do more things with me in the future. But like, yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of fair at the, you know, high theoretical level to make the point that just any business relationship between a buyer and a seller or a provider and a purchaser has some fundamental conflict in that I want you to pay me for my services. So I got to convince you that I'm going to be valuable, and hopefully we'll do that in an appropriate, reasonable, ethical way, and then actually deliver the stuff. So I mean, I think it's a fair point at that level. The caveat to me, and I think maybe indirectly some of the flack that you got back, because like one of the first responses for this was like, are you for real? What do you want? Like, go run a charity, right? Like if you don't want any money to exchange hands, just do it all for free. To me, the point and the essence of what really crops up, and this is what you find if you kind of go down the rabbit hole of like the actual fiduciary laws and kind of where all the common law stuff came from around fiduciary rulemaking. the essence of it is say, look, there are always conflicts out there in some way, shape, or form. Like a business relationship is a conflict. The issue is there are conflicts that reasonable professionals can manage.
Yeah.
And there are conflicts that are so fundamentally conflicted, it's not reasonable to expect the average person to be able to handle it on their own. Therefore, those either must be eliminated because you remove them from the equation, or must be eliminated because a regulator or a lawmaker says, this is not permitted, this is illegal, we're not going to allow this because this is deemed an unmanageable conflict of interest.
Give us some examples of unmanageable conflicts of interest.
So if you want to get
in our profession. First, let me just say one thing real quickly. This is not unique to our profession. Like people pointed out, like, what about dentists? No, every time I go to the dentist, and I have the best dentist in the world, like I think, we've been going to him for 10 years, but still, when he suggests 15 different things, I wonder like, hey, and my attorney.
Do I really need the super special new drug that's like a filler thing to make my gums better and like more healthy, whatever it is? Yeah.
And again, I trust, and that thought crosses my mind, and I go, oh yeah, that's right. It's Dr. So-and-so. He takes care of us. Like, it's not a problem. My attorney, like I paid a retainer. They bill against the retainer. Gosh, that took a lot longer than I thought it would. So people have been thinking about this for years. This is still an issue. So we're not alone. It's an okay conversation to have. And no, we aren't suggesting you go run a charity, because clearly one of the manageable conflicts is the fact that we should be paid. That's
by sub means, got to get paid for my services in some way. Like if I can't manage, I'm going to try to say I'm valuable and hope that you pay me for the thing that I'm saying is valuable. Like we have to do this dance. We have to at least go that far.
And we're going to have an agreement.
Yeah.
Like we're going to settle on what that value is. And that that is not the problem. Yep. So give us some examples of unmanageable conflicts in our profession, our industry.
So I'll answer this in two ways, sort of the modern conflict and the historical conflict. So the modern conflict, frankly, is commissions, and I'll pick on very high commissions in particular, just because it helps to emphasize and clarify the point. These things all exist on a spectrum, but that's part of the point, that at some point you have to decide where the dividing line is on the spectrum. So when I started in the business, the early versions of indexed annuities were just coming out. This was 20 years ago. Some of them were pretty simple, high quality, plain vanilla, very straightforward products. Like I remember Jackson National had a really simple, straightforward product. It paid a couple percent. It had a really straightforward formula. Everybody knew what they were getting. We got compensated a little to implement it. Then another company, who I won't pick on and leave nameless because they're still around, had a version of this contract with a 20-year surrender charge and a 20% upfront commission. I kid you not, this was a real product. Bearing in mind 20 years ago, like you could get over 6% in the money market. So high interest rates hit a lot of sins.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a contract with a 20-year surrender charge and a 20% upfront commission. And flat out paid way less than anything else that was available in the marketplace. No kidding, because only 80% of the client's money goes to work on day one, because the company's got to extract 1% a year for the next 20 years to make back the commission that they paid up front. And so you had this ultra high commission product. It was very controversial at the time, in part because the question became like, who sells this thing besides someone that just found a legal way to extract 20% of their client's net worth in one meeting? Like, it's okay to get paid something. It's okay to have a product that has some moving parts, but you literally had products that paid 3% and products that paid 20% in the same marketplace next to each other. And so somewhere between I'm going to get paid 3% to help this client implement something for the next 10 years. And I'm going to pay 20% for this client to be locked up for 20 years. Somewhere in between those two is where we go from manageable conflicts of interest to unmanageable. And in fact, one version of the thing at the time, like this was still the day when you sold A share and B share mutual funds that might have paid you 4 or 5%. So like the low cost annuity was actually cheaper than some other options in the investment marketplace in a world where we were all more commission based. But there was this 20% thing out there. And so that to me is sort of the modern version of, look, it's not about not getting paid for the time that you spend, but at some point, the thing is so outlandishly high compared to whatever else is in the marketplace that it becomes hard to figure out what the justification is for selling it, unless you asked anybody who actually sold it, who were still unequivocally convinced that they had helped a client out of a situation that they were previously in that was even worse, because they were buying tech stocks and the world was going to blow up, and I helped them with this annuity product.
I have this is an interesting example, and I'm trying not to take us down a different rabbit hole, but I have a theory that I want to understand, because I'm wondering if this all comes from, because I was just sitting here thinking, like, is that product illegal? Right? Like, okay, like we can debate all day long about whether or not it's immoral or it's incorrect or it doesn't fit or it's not good for the client. But is it or should it be illegal? And as soon as I thought that, I thought, well, I've had this theory that there are jobs in the world that it's an adversarial relationship where people are trying to sell you something. Mm-hmm. There's lots of jobs like that. Like
yes.
We know a good, like if you have somebody at the Toyota dealership that you've been buying cars for like 5 or 6, like I know Toyota salespeople that have families that have been coming to them like, for 20 years.
Yep.
The reason I go to them, they act differently. But the average salesperson that sells cars, when you walk in, that you're in an adversarial relationship. Like you got to be on guard. Does that make that person who sells cars? So here's my theory, is the difference between that person who sells cars and an advisor, which I'm putting, for anybody who's just listening, I'm just putting in huge air quotes, and an advisor is you don't know to expect that. Like pretending to be, and the whole industry, and I'm again in air quotes, the whole industry is pretending through advertising and things we write, like, oh, we're on yours. The whole industry is pretending to be, we'll use words like independent or objective. Yeah. Instead of going so strong as to say unconflicted, I don't know that we're the whole industry. So now nobody knows. So it's like walking into a car dealership and expecting.
Well, you're walking into an automotive consultancy and provides you guidance on the best transportation for your family's needs.
Yeah, so it's like I've always compared it to walking into the Toyota dealership expecting the Toyota salesperson to tell you that a Honda would be better if that indeed was for you. You're just not going to expect that. And so my theory is the huge problem. Like look, I may be wrong. I'm sure I'll hear about this if I am. I have this theory that charging a commission is not wrong. Just don't pretend like you're objective. That's wrong. All right. So my question is that, I hate to even use that example because it's so outlandish, but is charging a commission, a 3% commission, a 6% commission for an annuity, is that illegal? Like, should that be illegal? Or is there like a job for that? And we just need to be better about the industry knowing, like, that's what that person does. Over here, we do this. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. So to me, that's why I'm one of the people that has actually argued very hard for the past 10 years against all of these uniform fiduciary rules that keep getting proposed, including essentially what the Department of Labor did. I don't think there's such thing as advice that's not given in a fiduciary manner, like that the definition of the word advice is like it's advice for you. Like that's what makes it advice. So you can't have advice that's not in the best interest of the person receiving the advice. It's like the definition of the word advice. It's for that person. But there's still a role for salespeople. And there's nothing wrong with salespeople getting paid as salespeople. I've always viewed it that the issue is just we need to clarify the decision and the choice between when am I working with an advisor and when am I working with a salesperson, and let each of them clearly label themselves for the nature of the role in the relationship. And then people just understand how they want to handle it. I mean, there's a group of people out there like, no, I don't need a comprehensive financial plan. I don't want to pay someone a bunch of money. I just want to buy a thing and have a person that can help me buy the thing. And I don't mind the person gets paid for selling me the thing. I just want to be a reasonable salesperson who explains features and benefits so I can buy the thing. Like, I'll buy my car that way. I'll buy my suits that way. And I can buy some financial products that way when I know what's going on, right? I know what the deal is when I walk into the car dealership. Elliot Weisbooth at Hightower had a popular video that went around a couple of years ago about the difference between dietitians and butchers. Like, I understand when I go on the butcher, it's always meat. The answer is always meat. I'm not expecting objective vegan dietary advice from the butcher. I go to the dietitian for this, right? We know what our circumstances are. And part of the challenge I think we have in the current landscape is the circumstance, the dividing lines have become blurry. There were some rules that were put in place under the Investment Advice Act of 1940 that was supposed to separate these. The SEC has kind of allowed the line get blurrier and blurrier over the span of about 20 years. So like no one thing they did looked bad, but you look back 20 years later and it's like, these used to be separate categories. And now they're so blended together that literally like I can charge you a 1% fee-based wrap. I can charge you a 1% trail on a C-share. I can charge you 1% on advisory account. And from our end, just like I get paid 1%, I give you advice. Those are like completely different product categories that were never supposed to coexist in an advice realm.
Yeah, that to me is my theory, that if we fix that, we fix a lot of these other problems. Like I think you and I want to have an interesting conversation around some of these different fee models, but I think if we fix that, then because you can't, like you said, you can't call yourself an advisor by definition giving advice and not have it be in the client's best interest. Like that those things don't, it can't compute. So I think the huge dilemma to me is like, you don't know what you get. So if you're going to call yourself a certain thing, you better behave a certain way, right? So that the clients know what to expect when they show up. I'm going to see this person who calls themselves this thing. It means I'm going to get this type of advice.
Yep. But in the context of fees or fees versus commissions and conflicts of interest, the essence of the issue comes down to, when does this introduce a conflict that would be very difficult for any rational person to manage? And so, this comes to bear in a couple of different ways. It's one of the reasons why the angle of Department of Labor was not necessarily that all commissions must be gone, but it was that all commissions must be reasonable, right? Like, you could probably manage the conflicts around a 3% upfront. It's a lot harder to manage 20% upfront and not succumb to the temptation. But also that any products in a similar category had to be on same keel. If you're going to get paid a commission, it's got to be the same commission no matter what you use in the category, because otherwise you're immediately introducing a very challenging conflict, which is, I got these two things that are virtually identical. The only difference is one of them pays me more than the other.
Right.
In a best interest world, it's hard to explain why the second one should even exist. But if it does, you're just winding yourself up to get in trouble. So let's make the compensation the same across the category. So then at least we can't, we are eliminating that portion of the conflict. You may leave the commissions, but we're eliminating the differential compensation across them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those conflicts. So maybe we just pick like AUM.
Got a mortgage?
In an AUM model,
You got a mortgage? Because I encourage you to keep it.
Where do conflicts show up? And that was one that consistently would show up for me. Clients would say, you know what, I'd really like to pay off my mortgage.
Yeah, like, cool. That'll cost you $30,000 of fees on that client over the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So
300 grand hoovered out of their portfolio to pay off a mortgage.
Is that manageable or unmanageable?
Well, so I think this actually begins to highlight part of the challenges that our industry gets as our models evolve. So in a pure investment environment, my only job is to put on the blinders and manage your pot of money. Yes, I think that's a manageable conflict because it's really just the fundamental business conflict. Like, if all you ever did was hire me to manage your money and gave no other advice, then when you say, should I pay off the mortgage? We're back in car salesman world. We all understand how this works. I'm going to tell you no because all I do is manage your money and I would like to hold on to it.
And I'll build a fancy plan or like even just a model that tells you why it's even better, right? Like, sure, we're going to average 7.5%. Your cost of capital is 3%.
But we're clear on the relationship. I do think this is one that frankly has gotten harder for advisory firms as we get more holistic in our advice and the value proposition shifts from, I manage your pot of money, we all get, I'm going to try to hold on to the pot of money, take my advice with a grain of salt, to like, no, I'm a comprehensive wealth manager. I'm giving you advice holistically on everything, parentheses, but my billing is driven by the AUM side. Please don't disintermediate me too much. So I honestly think it's becoming more problematic. It's not something that keeps me up horribly at night right now, in part because, frankly, the clients, they're very driven to pay down their net debt, just tend to, damn it, do it anyways. Because it's not about the returns at that point anyways. It's a personal motivator driver. And, obviously this varies to some extent by the client, but for a lot of clients and advisors, like, it might be a non-trivial amount of money, but it's not a, like, I'm no longer going to be able to work with this client if they do this. Like, it doesn't blow up the relationship to the point we can't work together, which to me is the level when now you're really going to get an unmanageable conflict. But I do think at a minimum, it falls in the category of it's probably getting closer and closer to being a problem, because the more holistic our advice gets, the more clients I think actually rely on that advice, and our direct compensation incentive is to not pay down that mortgage. Obviously it gets a little easier right now because the mortgage is actually a really, really low interest rate. But strictly speaking, I would probably call that a justification. Yeah, I think this gets harder as the fee models change. But again, as you made the point earlier, like, it's not like this is a unique phenomenon to only assets under management, right? The hourly model, I have my challenges. And no matter what your problem is, it's highly complex and will require a great deal of research, right? Like what you always hear every time you go into your accountant or your attorney, like, well, it's complex. I'm gonna have to dig into this a little, right? Like we set up the billable hours until you put them on an open-ended retainer, and then everything gets solved really fast.
Yeah.
Because if I'm paying you the same dollar amount no matter what, every month or year or whatever it is the retainer is, now it's in your interest to solve my problems quickly and not long, and all of a sudden the advice gets a little bit faster and more expedient. So, there is some tension to any model. I think a part of it is acknowledging it. The questions become, when do we go so far down the conflict road that just, it's not even vague and ambiguous? This just can't be good, right? And I think that's part of why you're seeing right now the focal point the regulators are taking so hard is the one that is the easiest to prove. You had a choice of two things that were functionally identical, and one was just more expensive and paid you more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, like, pointing to specific product placement stuff is really easy to see. I just think this is a really interesting and important conversation for people. And I think, let me just talk a little bit about the AUM thing. So fundamentally, I believe the price we charge and the way we do it is a story. and that we need to be comfortable with the story that we're telling and what it says about us. Like it's not necessarily a fact. It's a story. And the most important part to me about that story is that you better, if any part of your story relies on clients not knowing something, like how long it took you to do the work would be an example. You just have to count on them knowing it. Like they're gonna, if they want to, they're gonna find out. Like I'm not even talking about you specifically. I'm just talking about an industry. So let me give you an example of the story that you gotta, like if AUM, and I'm not picking on AUM. I just think AUM is I don't know that relic's the right word, but AUM's a tradition that's been passed down from our fathers and mothers, right? Like in the industry. And it made sense at one point, clearly. And now the question we're just all wrestling with in the industry is, does that story still make sense? And I'm not saying it doesn't, but here's where I found myself once. And this was 10 years ago. Like I had a client who had a crazy amount of money with me. And I'm going to call him Sam, because that's my son's name. So Sam had a crazy amount of money with me. It was part of his big chunk of money from his business. And we were incredibly competitive. Like we earned this money because our fee was really, really competitive. And the fee was $120,000 a year. It was an AUM fee. And so I'm not going to give you the
So this was a fairly small percentage on a really big pot of money.
I'm not going to give you that. I'm not going to give you either number that will help you figure out how much it was, but it was a really small competitive fee. And it was still $120,000. So it was a lot of money. And one day, after working together for 2 or 3 years, they loved me, like we were great friends. And one day, Sam, the owner, the CEO, founder of the business, who I managed a bunch of money for personally and the business money, we were talking about the business money, $120,000 a year. Sam says to me, Sam had referred some friends to me, and he knew how much money the friends had. And they had a fraction of what Sam had. And these friends, one of them was his CFO, would go to him, and his CFO would say like, oh, I just met with Carl. So he's always hearing like, geez, my CFO is meeting with Carl all the time. So he said to me, he's like, hey, Carl, how much was your fee last year? And I, like a proud, confident advisor, said, let me look. I found it, and I just, no justification, no defensiveness. I said, I send you an invoice every quarter, but here's a copy of the last 4 invoices. It's $120,000. And he says to me, so just walk me through what you do for that. I help you avoid behavioral mistakes. I take on, we built this beautiful portfolio. No. What do you like time? Like, what do you actually, I was like, well, he said, so you come to the quarterly board meeting, right? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
You're
So
at the meeting.
it's like 2 or 3 hours per meeting and plus drive time.
And it's like, how long? I said, you're at the meeting for half an hour. I'm like, yeah, because I just come in, report, and leave. How much prep do you do? And I was like, Sam, I know where you're going with this, and let's have a conversation about it. But I mean, the number he worked out was, I can't remember what the number was, but it was like $5,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 an hour.
Yeah.
You better be comfortable with that story. That's all I'm saying, is you better understand what it means. And I think there's ways for me to envision being comfortable with that.
So did Sam renegotiate his fee that year? How did that go?
Sam didn't. We did end up a year or two later. Sam was an unreasonable client, not for that reason, but Sam ended up saying to me, in the middle of like a down market, all I want you to do is tell me when to sell before it goes down and tell me when to buy before it goes up. Your job is easy. And I was like, Sam, time for you to hit the road. So that's a longer story, but all I'm saying is we better be comfortable. Yeah. That's, to me, is the thing, is like, if the fee that you charge relies on some piece of information that the client doesn't know. And I'm not talking nefarious intent. I'm not talking hidden. I mean, of course, all that. But even some just basic stuff, like you better be comfortable. You better feel, I'm going to use a word that I don't mean, you better feel like you can defend, and I mean that in the traditional sense of the word, that you can defend that position, right? That's all I'm saying. And so pick a model that's aligned with that story. And because all of them are going to have conflicts. All of them. And like when somebody come ask me to pay a mortgage, my explanation always was, look, it's pretty clear you really want to do this. And it may feel like a conflict to you, but I don't see it that way. I see making you happy, giving you the best advice in the short term is in my enlightened long-term self-interest. Right?
Well,
End of story. Pay off your mortgage.
okay, but not everybody is as enlightened in their long-term self-interest. And everybody in our industry is good at telling a story.
I know. It's where it gets hard. Like, and touche for the use of the enlightened word for sure. I didn't like. I'm so enlightened. But I know we're really good at telling stories. We've got a huge problem. This is a problem that we are. It feels like it's. Again, I'm going to use another word like there's like disruptions happening in there's a disturbance in the force.
Yeah.
Right. And we're trying to sort out what it means and how do we do it. And when you do that, there's some real serious people who get really serious when how could you even suggest that I'm not worth $8,000 an hour? I'm just saying, hey, you better be comfortable with that story. That's all. And I'm saying the same thing about retainer, and I'm saying the same thing about AUM, and I'm so where do we go?
Yeah. Well, I think where we ultimately end out, frankly, is that I'm not sure that's actually enough.
What's not enough?
You better be comfortable with your fee and disclose it. Because the people that were selling that 20% annuity, someone out there, God bless, probably figured out a way to disclose it and explain it and still was a good enough storyteller to get someone to buy it. And I'd still have a concern about that.
I totally agree. And I think it's really problematic for me to use the word story because, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's what every crook and criminal in the world does. And you better believe they believe that they're doing the right thing, even when they're flat out crooks. Have you ever I've been amazed when somebody's doing something absolutely wrong. I'm not even talking about in our industry anymore, but like wrong. They don't really think, right? Like
we believe we're doing the right thing. I mean, there's a small subset out there that just actually wants to steal from people, but for most of the rest, like, again, that's the point of why we call them conflicts of interest, because not only can you potentially come up with a story that convinces someone on the other end, you can come up with a story that convinces yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what makes conflict so pernicious, and I think eventually gets us back into this realm of, is there a point at which some of these have to be banned? And I'll admit, I mean, I belong in the camp that I'm personally not convinced that 0 commissions, 100% fees is the only way to draw that line. If I mean, even in the context of your client that you were talking about, like, if you also helped him implement some term insurance for one of his businesses and he got paid $400 on the side and a commission for a term policy for a little buy-sell for his 17th business, is this actually a material conflict of interest because you earned a commission on top of your $120,000, $8,000 an hour fee? Probably not, right? There comes a point where the commissions realistically are small enough they're manageable. We in the industry lately have chosen to just make it a bright line between the two. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's where the line has to be drawn either. But part of the point of the challenge of this, and maybe where we wrap up, is just acknowledging, like, this is part of why it's so hard to draw the line. Because the whole point of why conflicts are problematic is we can disclose them and convince ourselves and still do it, because that's what happens when it's a conflict. You can fool yourself accidentally along the way as well. But figuring out where to draw the line when you got to manage a couple 100,000 human beings serving millions and tens of millions of consumers, like, welcome to the unenviable job of a regulator that actually has to figure out where to draw that line.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I'm using the word story hoping that this audience gives me the benefit of the doubt in terms of what I mean. Because I think it's still, to me, that's still the right way among like a group of friends around a table to describe it. Like, look, we got to be comfortable with that. And I'm operating under the assumption that we're all we're all honest in huge air quotes. Like, what does that even mean? Because here's another just giant, like I had one of my favorite financial advisors in the world. His name was John. I don't think he's still in the business, but during all this, movement to AUM, he refused because he bought individual portfolio of like 20 or 30 stocks for clients. He was at a big brokerage firm, and he was like, we hold these things forever.
Yeah.
It's absolutely in the best interest. Like you've seen those debates around, if you buy American funds was so, popular around this. Like you buy an A share where I pay 5% once and you hold it for 20 years, you're way better off than charging a 1% AUM fee. So John would say, look, here's my commissions. He would provide an itemized thing and say, versus if I had charged you this AUM fee, it would have been 2 or 3 times that, plus next year, plus next year, plus next year. So there's John doing the best thing for clients by charging a commission, but there's not very many people like John.
Right.
So that's where we get back to this problem. So I think, but in terms of like practical, like what does an advisor do? I think like an advisor, we just have to tell the truth, and we just have to open. And I know we know the problems around disclosures, but we have to be open to this discussion. Like we can't hide from this discussion. And we have to realize, like, even when it's volatile, the discussion that is, we got to have this discussion because we're working it out. I don't know the answer. I like to come up with pithy statements and strong opinions, but I know they're wrong, right? Like, I know they lack nuance. I know we got to figure it out, but we got to be having the discussion.
Well, and again, I think the other thing to me is, as we wrap up, is just, for every John who does it right, there's someone who's going to rip, 50% of that client's net worth because they're going to flip into a new A share for another 5% every other year for the next 20 years.
And be completely convinced somehow, either be completely
Each one at the increment makes sense at the time.
How much better this is. And and if they're not convinced themselves, they will definitely be able to tell a really great story to the client. And so the question just becomes, like, in the end, I'm like huge fan of big industry bodies having this debate on a global sort of level. And I'm looking at individual level advisors one by one in the eyes and saying, hey, why don't you do the right thing? And hey, why don't you do the right thing? And hey, why don't I do the right thing? And let's see if we can change it that way too.
Amen. Amen.
Cool, man. That takes work, but you can do it.
All right.
Okay, man.
Thanks,
See ya.
Carl.